Next up, let's take a look at Implement Platform Protection. In this section, there are two main subcategories that you want to make sure you're familiar with. Again, we will highlight some of the newer things, and in the hidden slides, there will be more details of the others. First, we have Implement Advanced Network Security, where we're going to cover things like NSGs, ASGs. You need to be familiar with how to create, configure Azure Firewall, Firewall Manager, Front Door Service, Azure Bastion, Service Endpoints, and DDoS. The second major category in here is Configure Advanced Security for Compute. So configure endpoint protection, monitoring, authentication for Azure Container Registry, isolation for AKS, Azure Disk Encryption, SSL, TLS certs, Azure Kubernetes Service, automatic updates, and a bunch more topics. But again, always go back to that aka.ms/AZ-500 for the exam objectives to make sure you know the details. But here's what we will show you next. Let's start with application security groups. Application security groups enable you to configure network security as a natural extension of an application structure, allowing you to group virtual machines and define network security policies based on those groups. You can reuse your security policy at scale without manual maintenance of explicit IP addresses. The platform handles the complexity of IP addresses and multiple rule sets. An application security group enables you to group together servers with similar functions, such as web servers. When you create an ASG, you have to simply provide the following. First, a name, and then select the subscriptions and resource group where it will live, along with the location or region, such as US West or East. When the portal creates a virtual machine, it also creates a network interface for each virtual machine and attaches the network interface to the VM. All that you have to do to complete this is add the network interface for each VM to one of the application security groups you created previously. From a design perspective, just think of ASGs as controlling network traffic across a set of similar servers or roles. In comparison to network security groups or NSGs, those are typically used to control traffic from one application tier to another, such as from the back end to the middle tier and then to the front ends. Azure Firewall Manager is a security management service that provides central security policy and route management for cloud-based security perimeters. Firewall Manager can provide security management for two network architecture types. Secure Virtual Hub, which is an Azure Virtual WAN Hub. It's a Microsoft managed resource that lets you easily create hub and spoke architectures. When security and routing policies are associated with such a hub, it is referred to as a secured virtual hub. Hub Virtual Network. This is a standard Azure virtual network that you create and manage yourself. There are multiple ways to implement Azure Firewall. This provides a high-level overview of the required components and steps involved for the deployment process. Make sure that you also review the included link in the slide if you need even more details to enhance your comprehension. Another way to enforce your learning is just to get in the Azure portal and walk through the steps. For the hub virtual networks, there are four main tasks. Create a firewall policy. Make sure you know the three ways you can do this. Create your hub and spoke architecture. Select security providers and associate firewall policy. Currently, only Azure Firewall is a supported provider. And then configure user-defined routes or UDRs to route traffic to your hub virtual network firewall. There are 4 steps in creating your secured virtual hubs. First, create your hub and spoke architecture. You can create a secured virtual hub using Azure Firewall Manager and add virtual network connections, or create a virtual WAN hub and then add virtual network connections. 2, select security providers. This can be done when creating a new one, or you can convert an existing virtual WAN hub. 3, create a firewall policy and associate with your hub. And 4, configure route settings to route traffic to your secured hub. There are some important things to note in this process. You can't have more than one hub per virtual WAN per region, but you can add multiple virtual WANs in the region to achieve this. You can't have overlapping IP address spaces for hubs in a vWAN, and your hub VNet connections must be in the same region as the hub. This only applies if you convert an existing virtual network to a hub virtual network. If the virtual network has an existing Azure firewall, you select a firewall policy to associate that with the existing firewall. The firewall provisioning status will be updated when the firewall policy replaces firewall rules. During the provisioning state, The firewall continues processing traffic and has no downtime. You can import existing rules to a firewall policy using Firewall Manager or Azure PowerShell. If the virtual network doesn't have an associated Azure firewall, a firewall is deployed and the firewall policy is associated with the new firewall. A core component of every cyber risk and security program is the identification and analysis of vulnerabilities. Security Center regularly checks your connected machines to ensure they're running vulnerability assessment tools. When a machine is found that doesn't have vulnerability assessment solution deployed, Security Center generates the following security recommendations. Use this recommendation to deploy the vulnerability assessment solution to your Azure virtual machines and your Azure Arc-enabled hybrid machines. Then you can deploy the vulnerability assessment solution that best meets your needs. You can choose either the Integrated Vulnerability Assessment Solution, powered by Qualys, or a Bring Your Own License BYOL solution. Azure Defender includes vulnerability scanning for your machines at no extra cost. You don't need a Qualys license or even a Qualys account. Everything's handled seamlessly inside Security Center. Note that the Integrated Vulnerability Assessment Solution supports both Azure virtual machines and hybrid connections. To deploy the Vulnerability Assessment Scanner to your on-premises and multi-cloud machines, connect them to Azure first with Azure Arc. Security Center's Integrated Vulnerability Assessment Solution works seamlessly with Azure Arc. When you have deployed Azure Arc, your machines will appear in Security Center and no log analytics agent is required. Security Center supports the integration of tools from other vendors, but you'll need to handle the licensing costs, deployment, and configuration. By deploying your tool with Azure Security Center, you'll get information about which Azure virtual machines are missing the tool. You'll also be able to view findings within Security Center. If you'd prefer to use your organization's private Qualys or Rapid7 license instead of the Qualys license included with Azure Defender, just follow the How to Deploy a BYOL solution. The supported BYOL solutions report vulnerability data to the partner's management platform. In turn, that platform provides vulnerability and health monitoring data back to Security Center. You can then identify vulnerable VMs on the Security Center dashboard and switch to the Partner Management Console directly from Security Center for additional reports and information. Azure Bastion is a service you deploy that lets you connect to a virtual machine using your browser and the Azure portal. The Azure Bastion service is a fully platform-managed PaaS service that you provision inside your virtual network. It provides secure and seamless RDP or SSH connectivity to your virtual machines directly from the Azure portal over TLS. When you connect via Azure Bastion, your virtual machines do not need a public IP address, agent, or special client software. Bastion provides secure RDP and SSH connectivity to all the VMs in the virtual network in which it's provisioned. Using Azure Bastion protects your virtual machines from exposing RDP and SSH ports to the outside world while still providing secure access using RDP and SSH. Azure Bastion deployment is per virtual network, not per subscription or account or virtual machine. Once you provision an Azure Bastion service in your virtual network, the RDP SSH experience is available to all your VMs in the same virtual network. When working with Azure Bastion, you can use network security groups or NSGs, but UDRs or user-defined routes is not supported on an Azure Bastion subnet. Enable and work with Bastion resource logs. As users connect to workloads using Azure Bastion, Bastion can log diagnostics of the remote sessions. You can then use the diagnostics to view which users connected to which workloads, at what time, from where, and other such relevant login information. In order to use the diagnostics, you must enable diagnostic logs on Azure Bastion. Session monitoring and management for Azure Bastion. Once the Azure Bastion service is provisioned and deployed in your virtual network, you can use it to seamlessly connect to any VM in this virtual network. As users connect to workloads, Azure Bastion can be used to monitor the remote sessions and take quick management actions. Azure Bastion Session Monitoring lets you view which users are connected to which VMs. It shows the IP that the user connected from, how long they've been connected, and when they connected. The session management experience lets you select an ongoing session and force disconnect or delete a session in order to disconnect the user from the ongoing session. In the Bastion Fact Doc, there are many things to review. Here are some considerations. Can you use hosts across peered networks? What about across subscriptions? Yes to both, but no across Azure AD tenants. Note that IPv4 is only supported. Do I need a public IP on my virtual machine to connect via Azure Bastion? No. When you connect to a VM using Azure Bastion, you don't need a public IP on the Azure virtual machine that you're connecting to. The Bastion service will open the RDP SSH session connection to your virtual machine over the private IP of your virtual machine within your virtual network. Azure Front Door is an application delivery network, or ADN, as a service offering various Layer 7 load balancing capabilities for your applications. It provides dynamic site acceleration, or DSA, along with global load balancing with near real-time failover. It is a highly available and scalable service which is fully managed by Azure. If you have access to Lynda, which is now LinkedIn Learning, there is a video walkthrough to see how to configure the Azure Front Door. Alternatively, some of you may prefer learning by doing, but even if you don't have access to an Azure environment, you can at least read the walkthrough of how to set up Azure Front Door. Make sure you understand the various components that must be configured. Distributed denial of service, or DDoS attacks, are some of the largest availability and security concerns facing customers that are moving their applications to the cloud. A DDoS attack attempts to exhaust an application's resources, making the application unavailable to legitimate users. DDoS attacks can be targeted at any endpoint that is publicly reachable through the internet. DDoS Protection Standard monitors actual traffic utilization and constantly compares it against the thresholds defined in the DDoS policy. When the traffic threshold is exceeded, DDoS mitigation is initiated automatically. When traffic returns below the thresholds, the mitigation is stopped. Make sure you understand what else you get with the standard protection versus the basic level of protection. The Azure Security Benchmark provides recommendations on how you can secure your cloud solutions on Azure. The content is grouped by the security controls defined by the Azure Security Benchmark and the related guidance applicable to DDoS protection. There are many logging and monitoring options in this link that you will want to review. It's a good practice to test your assumptions about how your services will respond to an attack by conducting periodic simulations. During testing, validate that your services or applications continue to function as expected and there's no disruption to the user experience. Identify gaps from both a technology and process standpoint and incorporate them in the DDoS response strategy. It's best to perform such tests in staging environments or during non-peak hours to minimize the impact to the production environment. The link provided will walk you through how to configure a DDoS test attack. A DDoS protection plan works across regions and subscriptions. The same plan can be linked to virtual networks from other subscriptions in different regions across your tenant. With that final point, note it would not span across multiple Azure AD tenants, only across and within a single tenant. To work with DDoS protection plans, your account must be assigned to the network contributor role or to a custom role that is assigned the appropriate actions listed in this link. Containers are becoming the preferred way to package, deploy, and manage cloud applications. Azure Container Instances offer the fastest and simplest way to run a container in Azure without having to manage any virtual machines and without having to adopt a higher level service. Containers are built from images that are stored in one or more repositories. These repositories can belong to a public registry like Docker Hub or to a private registry. A publicly available container image does not guarantee security. Container images consist of multiple software layers, and each software layer might have vulnerabilities. To help reduce the threat of attacks, you should store and retrieve images from a private registry such as Azure Container Registry or Docker Trusted Registry. In addition to providing a managed private registry, Azure Container Registry supports several principal-based authentication through Azure Active Directory for basic authentication flows. This authentication includes role-based access for read-only, pull, write, push, and other permissions. Make sure that you review these recommendations as well as many more on the link below. Just search for that title and it will come up in your favorite search engine.